All right.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host today, Objectively Dan, and this is a live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where we want to talk to people about what they believe and why. And every single week, I have a very special guest. This week is no different. This week's guest is Ceasetoknow. Ceasetoknow, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yes. Thank you for being on. If you're not familiar, this is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, which is a 501c3 organization dedicated to the promotion of positive atheist culture and the separation of religion and government. There are a number of different ways you can support the ACA, and we're going to get to those in a little bit. But first, I want to introduce my guest again. Ceasetoknow, welcome. You are a host on the channel Axioms on Trial. And so I thought you could tell us a bit, like, what is your channel? What is it that you do?
Okay, so basically we examine questions of religion, science, philosophy, especially philosophy. That is more of what my focus is on. And we break down clips. We host debates. Sometimes, I co-host the show with J. Mike, and sometimes he and I have a back and forth on our different differences of opinion on philosophy and other questions. And so we really try to analyze different belief systems and kind of put pressure on them and find their strengths and their flaws and whether or not they hold up to scrutiny. And yeah, I would say that is the focus.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, J. Mike is actually another host of the ACA. He hosts, he's hosted with me on Talk Heathen. And is on there sometimes, so you should definitely check out Axioms on Trial if you like J. Mike. But Ceasetoknow, you're interesting. You have a bachelor's in philosophy, and you are finishing up your master's in philosophy as well. So you're a philosophy guy, right? You're philosophical.
I've always been. I mean, it's been part of my life since I can remember. My father was a philosophy professor as well, so I'm kind of following in the same.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
And it's something that I've always been interested in. It's in my blood. It's I love learning about it and thinking about it and talking about it. So
I like it too. When I was really deconstructing my Christianity, I went through a whole. I guess I was interested in philosophy before that, but I think it spurred an interest even more once I started really questioning my own beliefs and talking to other people about it. I think it's. There's a lot of great philosophical exercises I think everybody should, try for themselves. But also philosophy can get really deep and really obscure and sometimes not too, not too accessible for a lot of people, I feel like sometimes.
That's definitely true. I mean, it definitely depends on who you read. There are those that are extremely difficult. Like you'll read a page and it's like, I have no idea what this is saying. And it takes a while, it takes a lot of time and effort and to sort of get at what is actually being said, but for me that's part of the fun. Mm-hmm. It really depends on who it is that I'm reading. But
I thought we could start this conversation tonight actually with talking about a question that really vexed me when I was first kind of deconstructing, which is like something I'm much more knowledgeable on now, and maybe for some people like this is just like not even a question, but for me, this was something that was really hard for me to get over. I really couldn't understand, and this sounds so silly saying it, but I really couldn't understand how somebody could be quote unquote good without God. Okay. And what I mean by that is like, not that people couldn't be good and not be Christians, but couldn't fully be good. when answering this question. So yeah, I couldn't figure out how people could fully be good without being Christian on some level, because I thought Christianity and the systems of morality, I guess, or its axioms of morality, was like the highest ideal. But for me, this question really began to fall apart when, one, you had to figure out which kind of Christianity, because there's like a billion different kinds of Christianity, but also like pretty much since the turn of the 20th century, there's been so much literature on like secular form. I mean, even before that, but most, broadly, there's been a lot of literature past, the 1900s on, morality and what that looks like in a secular form. So I thought we could talk about that a bit. How you feel about this idea when Christians say that we just can't be good without God, or that ethics is just unattainable without some sort of Christian ethic or God ethic built into your system.
Right. I think that is definitely the wrong approach to take. Like, all it requires is kind of move away from the perspective, is really do the work and reading the philosophy. It's the other way around. It's religion borrows on certain ethical intuitions, but it isn't the source of them. You find already moral concept within the religion and then expand it. But it's funny that atheists have their morality called subjective, when in reality it's the other way around. It's like, it's from their perspective that if what is moral is what God says is moral, then it's actually the definition of subjective morality, subjective to whatever God says.
Sure.
From my perspective, morality is dependent on facts that we can learn about consciousness in the context of well-being and suffering, which I don't think are arbitrary concepts. I don't think the words like good and bad are arbitrary. I think they're descriptions of different kinds of states. And so when we're talking about oughts in any context, we're talking about what kind of steps we can take to achieve certain goals. And in the moral context, they are steps related to how can we live our life, how can we interact with the other, how we can organize our society to move us towards a state of flourishing as opposed to a state of suffering. And so, for example, I don't really buy the whole is-ought problem. Like, I don't think, which essentially says that we can't derive an ought from an is.
Right.
I don't really buy that. Because really what we're always talking about when we're talking about oughts are reflections of is. Like, we examine a state of being, and then we examine what steps we take to reach that state. It may be true that logically, like just on pure logic, we can derive one from the other, but that's just applying the wrong tool in the wrong conversation. So I think that is kind of a misconception people have there. I think the moment that you will acknowledge that consciousness has a structure, that the nature of our experience has a structure to it, it's not arbitrary, it's not random, that there's a nature to how we experience the world, then we can examine that nature and arrive at the conclusion that suffering is a real state of being, flourishing is a real state of being, and our values based on those states are not arbitrary. Like, it doesn't really make sense to me to suggest that somebody could value suffering until they're dead. Even someone who may be a masochist, there's a relationship there where it's pleasure and pain. There's a connection there, but I'm talking about something deeper, not just pure pleasure and pain.
Okay.
Talking about something that's
Yeah, that's interesting. So, because I think even in the atheist community, there is a divide on how people view issues of ethics, of morality. Like, if you ask any Christian, I think most Christians are going to say, no, morality is objective and it's based on, God's law or God's will or something like that. But you don't see that that kind of cohesion with people in the secular world. So I happen to think, I think a lot of people assume otherwise because my name is Objectively Dan. I'm a bit more on the ethical subjectivist side when it comes to like this conversation, because I agree with you that I want to prevent suffering, and I think that suffering can be objectively, modeled in some ways, right? Like we can identify states of suffering and we can examine that, and we can agree on those facts. But where I defer is this idea that at the end of the day, what we call something good or bad is ultimately based on interests, particularly human interests for a lot of time. And some people might find that confusing because, we do things that may not seem in our own self-interest all the time. We talk about acts of altruism, but there is some kind of interest that's being gained there. For one, the view of wanting to be altruistic is one particular ends for that. Another one is a sense of self-consistency. I like to have an ethical system because that's consistent with myself, that makes me psychologically healthier rather than one that's inconsistent. So I don't know. I go back to this idea that I really think a lot of morality boils down to human interests or just self-interest, and that's hard for me to get around. Because and one last thing on that I'll say, because it's like if I was to convince somebody who is diagnosed as a sociopath, right, like medically diagnosed, that ethics is objective, could I convince them of that? Could they follow that? Would they have any care to do that? Because if they don't have that interest in that, then it almost seems like there's just no argument there, if that makes sense. But maybe you can just completely blow me apart and make you look silly. I don't know. Oh, see, you there? Oh, there we go. We kind of lost you for a second. Go ahead.
So yeah, definitely put it all up there on the table. So let me start from the last thing you said backwards.
Yeah.
Whether or not a person agrees is not really, from my perspective, relevant, because people might reject scientific facts, right? But it doesn't make them not true. Now, I actually agree with you in part that yes, there is a level of self-interest within moral frameworks. Of course, there is. Like, yes, we have an interest in not suffering till we're dead. It doesn't undermine the objectivity. If we look at how the interest plays into the nature of how we experience the world, as long as it's I'll say this as well. There's a confusion of terms that I often hear between relative and subjective. Everything that we experience is subjective.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that there isn't an objective way to talk about it. Like if you and I look at a glass on a table, we're experiencing that subjectively. But we can still talk about the glass on the table in objective terms, even though we're experiencing it from two different points of view. Relative is something else. It's essentially saying that there is no real grounding. Anything goes. And as far as the coherency of the religious perspective, for them to say that morality is objective, and then in the same sentence say that it is dependent on what God says, that is a contradiction, because that framework is inherently subjective to God's desires and God's wills. It can't, by definition, be objective.
Sure.
So, the example of the psychopath, the sociopath, it may be true that there are certain states of being that the person who's suffers from psychopathy or can't access. I think even they have some sense of self-preservation usually.
Sure.
But I don't really see that as a problem for my framework, because it's like saying, does pain not exist because there are people who have pain disorders? That doesn't really follow in my mind. Like there may be certain outliers, but the outliers don't really undermine the sort of my argument here, is that there is a nature that applies to those that can experience those things. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that that is really a problem for my view.
Okay, I see that. Yeah, I guess if nobody had any self-interests, could ethics exist? That's what I wonder. If we were all basically about as self-interested as rocks, would ethical systems even matter? Could we say that there are actions that are right or wrong? And I would say no, because ultimately we care about people's interests, and that's what determines why we can determine some acts to be morally good and some acts to be evil. I think that me killing you for just out of the blue would be wrong because you have an interest in living. But if you had no specific desire to live one way or the other, like anybody else, I would almost say that that the idea that something is good or bad almost falls apart. It would be the same as hitting a rock. The rock doesn't care that I would hit it,
Sure.
So I go back to this idea that ethics seems to come from interests.
I don't disagree, but I don't think that it coming from interest undermines its objective nature. Like, yes, obviously, if we didn't have the capacity to experience or have desires or experience suffering or well-being, it wouldn't matter. But that's what it means to be conscious, right? Which is why I move it beyond just human interest. Like the moment that we recognize another species has the capacity to suffer, then it becomes an ethical concern.
Oh yeah,
for us.
I'm with you on that part.
So I don't really disagree with what you're saying about interest. I just don't think that undermines the concept of objective morality.
I guess we both agree that ethics involves interests or conscious beings' interests, because I think we're both on that.
Absolutely,
we're on that front. I think what we differ on is whether that makes it subjective or not, because interests have to exist in order for ethics to exist. I think that's true. Would we have to say that science wouldn't exist unless interests exist? Or I don't know. I'm trying to think of like an equivalent here, because I don't know. It's a strange thing to me that if you just tweak this one thing about reality, suddenly ethics as a whole doesn't seem to make sense, right? And that one thing being people's interests.
But what matters is the reality of the fact, right? Like the fact is that we are conscious, we have the experiences that we have, and we have the interests that we have. So I care about what is the case. The hypotheticals of potentially removing it from the totality, well then, by that logic, we can do it with anything, right? Like, well, yeah, we would live in a different universe if we could change, X, Y, or Z. But let's look at the universe that we are in, and what we can say about the universe given the circumstances.
I see. So you're saying that the fact that people do have interests, actually, that's what makes morality objective. In some sense.
And also because if we look at our nature and how we experience, we'll actually find that we're not as different as we think we are. Now, there are belief systems that get in the way of that, right? Like when people believe that, well, you have to do, if you have to kill a certain amount of people to get into heaven, like as a hypothetical.
Sure.
Well, then, their interest gets recalibrated in this, obviously, from my perspective, very immoral. But that is only because they don't have access to higher states of well-being that we will be able to point to. To say that, no, actually collaboration with the other, having respect for their freedom of will, valuing evidence in the way that we approach reality, as opposed to believing based on wishful thinking or what is fed to us through culture. Having, I think it's possible to say we can have better values. The values aren't arbitrary, that you can compare and contrast different sets of values and say why some are better and some are worse.
Right. So that's another thing too. And we'll touch on this briefly before we get the calls here, because we are running out of time in the first 20 minutes. I was wondering if we were going to have enough time or if we had enough to talk about, but here we are getting to a whole conversation here. But this is what the religious person will bring up, right? They'll say, well, how can you have morality, or how can you say that morality is objective if everything is just based on your own interests, right? This is their big thing, because everybody can have different interests. Like you said, somebody's interest could be that they want to get to quote unquote heaven, and in order to do that, they may have to make some sort of sacrifice, right? It's like, but if I don't see things that way, if I don't think that that's a real thing, or if I don't even care about heaven, then suddenly my view of what I think is right or wrong shifts. So I think that's what Christians kind of point out as what makes it subjective.
Yeah, but well, it's both subjective and objective. It's subjective in the sense that we all experience our nature subjectively, but it's objective in the sense that we have a shared nature. The Christian has to answer how it can be that anything goes if consciousness has a nature to it that we can discover and point to and analyze. They have the same problem. Like, they are also concerned with well-being and suffering. They're just extending those notions in a context of heaven and hell. Yeah, that, from my perspective, is unnecessary. They're making their framework is similar, but they're making more assumptions, and also they're sometimes conflating. I think they're ultimately wrong about what will lead to well-being and suffering, because they're kind of basing it on these traditions that are actually inherently problematic and outdated and messed up. But
yeah, see, and I would agree with you that they are outdated and messed up and stuff. I think it comes with how do I sufficiently argue that to somebody without admitting, at least on some level, that we're talking about my personal values, right? Because I value science, I value reason, but that's something that not everybody values. So it kind of, you see what I mean? It kind of runs into a wall a little bit.
But ultimately, whether or not you can convince, it's like saying, how do you convince someone that to value evidence if they don't value it? Whether or not a person believes in gravity or not is not relevant, because it still is the case. So it's, I'm not necessarily interested in convincing somebody to have my values. It depends on whether or not they value evidence in the first place, and whether or not they value suffering and well-being in the first place. And if they don't, that's fine, but then they can't be said to be talking in the moral sphere. It's like saying, let's think about the concept of health, right? Like, you can't pretend like you're talking about health if you have happened to define health as, drinking poison until I'm vomiting and I'm dead. Like, that's just not how we apply the words.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Great conversation here. Very interesting. I'd love to hear what other people have to say about this, whether I'm a big dummy or whether you guys agree with Ceasetoknow. I'm always fascinated by this stuff. So we should get to calls here in just a second. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to the patron of the week. Every single week we give a shout out to one of our patrons. I love everybody that donates to the show, but we always give a shout out just to one person each week. And this week's patron of the week is Lauren Zugai. Thank you so much, Lauren Zugai, for donating on patreon.com. And folks, I got to tell you something. We are out. We are out of original. I want to say original. We are out of unique names that have been shouted out on this show. In other words, if nobody donates on the show next week, but by next week, that is, we are going to have to cycle through our patrons who have already donated, and I will happily do that for you guys. But it just goes to show that I would love for more people to donate to Truth Wanted and to donate to all of our productions, but specifically this one. I kind of like this one. It helps make this show happen every single week. It helps get equipment. It helps makes some future plans that's going to happen. I just got some word today on some stuff that's happening in the month of October that you guys are going to love. But yeah, like all that stuff can only happen through you guys' donations. So please, if you are feeling generous, donate to patreon.com/truthwanted. Thank you to everybody who donates. You guys rock. So now I want to get to some calls here. So we got a couple of calls on the lineup here. Man, lots of different stuff. Just lots of different stuff here. One that's going to kind of follow in directly with what we were talking about. I think we should start with this one first. Talking to Jim, who's calling in from Canada. Jim, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It's nice over here in Canada.
Good. I'm glad. Wonderful. What's going on, Jim?
I was just listening to the front part of the show, and I thought about ethics a lot, and I often try and boil things down. And I was thinking about how, ethically, under certain circumstances, my ethics can be at a higher standard than they would be if I was, say, homeless or in a worse situation. And I wasn't really sure if that was something like a too basic a consideration, but I often try and boil things down to, if you're hungry and, you have to, say, kill an animal and eat it. That's something you wouldn't normally do. Ethically, you might even be against that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're hungry, then you're ethics of eating.
Sure. Yeah.
On a more basic level.
I guess I'm not sure. I mean, I agree with you in the sense that, I try to abstain from animal products, as much as I can. But again, if somebody's going to say, what if you're on a desert island, Dan? Yeah, I'm going to do what I can to survive. But, that's not obviously a normal situation. I don't live on a desert island every day. So I have access to other things in the same way that hey, you may get in a plane crash in the Himalayas and you might have to eat your friend. But you wouldn't want to eat your friend every day. That doesn't mean that's reasonable for you to go around eating your friends all the time just because you'd have to in one specific situation. So I guess I agree with you in that sense. I'm not sure what exactly the point you were trying to make is, Jim.
I think my point is my friends are delicious. Is my point.
Your friends are delicious. Okay. Well, I mean, more.
I think.
There are fetish websites out there for you where you can partake in that in safe ways that don't harm other people. For the most part, I think. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but more power to you there, Jim.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Look, I think I wasn't able to articulate my point, but I appreciate you guys taking my call. Have a good night. I'll get out of the way.
Okay. All right. Well, do you want something you want to add?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, it's even the fact that you can have context, that doesn't undermine the fact that there is still an objective way we talk about morality. There may be cases where, yes, you're put in a situation where no matter what you do, it can be viewed as immoral, but it can still be on a spectrum of, well, it's less immoral than potentially another action. Anytime that you're sort of violating somebody's freedom of will, that's going to be a problem. You may be put in a situation where you have to do that, for your own survival. But so again, it's on a spectrum there. I don't think that is necessarily a problem for what it is that I'm trying to put forward. Yeah,
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, there's always, the whole thing, what makes ethics useful is determining what the best choice, quote unquote, is to make in situations where it's not immediately clear, right? I think that's what ethics is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be useful for us. And it's those kind of case issues where I think, I don't know, I almost feel like we're always going to have different perspectives on. And that's, not to go back to this discussion that we have, but that to me is always going to make me think that, morality does have this inherent subjective quality to it. If there's going to be things where the best experts in this field of ethics can't still determine what's going to be best. But
keep in mind that just because we can't have answers right away doesn't mean that there aren't ones. We don't know how many bees there are in the world right now, but that question still has an answer.
That's interesting. But I would also say we have a method of at least figuring that out. Even if, we can all count, you know what I mean? There's still a method there. I'm not sure if the science of ethics has.
It's getting there. The more work we do in neuroscience, the closer we get to.
I agree. I think neuroscience is going to answer a lot of questions for us as far as what's going to be best in the future and for now. But anyway, we've got some other stuff we want to talk to people about. I want to talk to Alex. Alex, who's calling in from New York. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, Dan. Hey, guest. Yeah. I always forget your guest's name.
This is Ceasetoknow from Axiom's On Trial.
How are you doing?
How you guys doing today?
We're doing good. Having a really interesting discussion. I hope other people find this interesting. I understand that these diatribes on philosophy can sometimes be a bore to people, but in the right context, I think it's pretty fun. So what's up, Alex?
I think, well, side note, I think philosophy should be more taught in schools, honestly. I think at least Psychology 101 should be at least free, but that's a side point that I did not want to talk about. I wanted to talk to you guys about how to deal with somebody who has gaslit you in the past. I want to get your opinions on how to deal with somebody like that.
Yeah, give me an example. Like, what specifically? Sounds like, is this something you're dealing with right now?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys know about this or not. I'm pretty sure you know. I was raised up in an AA cult. I was a Pentecostal Christian for most of my life, and I was gaslit a lot as a child. Let's just leave it at that for now.
Sure.
That's all the context you really need for now.
Yeah. Gaslighting is a hard thing to deal with. I think most people who have deconstructed from a pretty hardcore religious faith have to deal with this on some level. I've had to deal with this from my deconstruction because I have had people, there's comments out there people who have seen my story and know what I'm about who said, well, it's so sad that Dan became this person that he is, and that if only he read apologetics or if only he did this and this, he could have been this person that he is. If only he knew about, the such and such, then we could prevent this thing from happening. Well, the truth is I did read a lot of apologetics. I had lots of conversations with people, and I had a lot of thought put into it. So this was never an issue of me not thinking it through enough or me not exploring this enough with other people. I definitely did. It's just the conclusions I came to are different from the person who is, quote unquote gaslighting my experience, right? It sucks. I've had to deal with that in person and just online. It's out there. For myself, I have to say the best that I've been able to deal with that is just to stick to my own convictions, stick to what I know to be true. I have personal writings on my own experiences when I was dealing with it at the time, and I'm lucky enough to where I have a whole conversation of myself on YouTube when I was a Christian. So I know what I was about, I know who I was, and there I am for people to see. Other people can make judgments about me all day, but I truly have to stick to my guns and know where I'm at and who I'm about first. And the people who have stuck through that, they know that too. And they know that the only thing that I've changed since then is that I'm more honest and open about how I'm thinking and feeling and don't have to hide it as much as I used to. I used to have these kinds of conversations in clandestine. I definitely wasn't as open about a lot of the thoughts that I have now, but now I get to be it. And that's such an amazing, freeing thing that I hope you can feel too, if you don't feel that already, and other people can feel if you feel like you're being gaslit about your specific situation. But it's tough. It's super, super tough. And my only advice is you got to stick to your guns. You got to be true to yourself.
And I want to add to that ultimately you can't control other people's behaviors and thoughts. Like if you're interested in maintaining a relationship with this person, the best you can do is try to honestly engage them, to tell them your experience, to tell them how you feel about it. And then if they're unwilling to give you the respect of trying to hear you out, well, then maybe it's just not a relationship worth keeping, or keeping it with the understanding that they're not going to give you what you want from them. You know yourself, you know what you went through, and that's what matters the most. You can't control other people to see reality for what it is sometimes. And just like you said, just stick to your guns and try to be the best person that you can be.
I guess that's a little bit harder for some cases where you don't really have any other support systems out there.
It can be really hard, absolutely. But at the same time, it's like if they're unwilling. I mean, I'm a big believer in therapy and group therapy, and but again, it requires the other party to come into the conversation in good faith, to try to come into the conversation with an open mind. If they're unwilling to do that, you can't necessarily make them do that. It's it's a really unfortunate situation that a lot of people who have had the religion deconstructed find themselves in, because a lot of people aren't willing to really engage those issues in an honest way.
It's true. And plus, a lot of people do that sometimes out of projection, a fear that they themselves could be like how you were, a non-believer in some sense, right? And when framed from the believer's perspective, that's one of the worst things you can do, because like having the faith, at least from my religious background, that was the most important thing. You always had to have the faith, no matter what. Even if you were having doubts, you still had to have some core of belief at the end of the day. And so when you lose that, that's scary for people, because that also questions their own systems of belief, right? And that's a threat. That's a threat to some people's stability. Some people have built their entire careers off of having beliefs like that. I started off, I thought I was going to work in the Christian nonprofits. I had several jobs working through Christian organizations. And, I had this idea that God was going to provide a life path for me, and losing that belief was really scary. I didn't know how to figure things out for myself, but I got over it eventually. And here I am today, I think fairly well adjusted, but hey, so for some people it's going to be a hard experience to just have that conversation in general. And the fact that some people just can't accept that you are who you are, that's their problem. That's not your problem, right?
I want to point something out. And I'm going to do this very selectively, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but the facts don't really care about feelings.
Sure.
You guys know what the 3 degrees of cults are, correct? You know everything about the bite model.
Yes, I'm familiar with the bite model.
Okay. So using the bite model, I think we can both agree that 90% of religions fall under the 2nd degree of cult. Most theistic religions. And a lot.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make really grand sweeping statements like that without really thinking about it at first, but I'll let you give your opinion on it and we can go from there.
What I'm trying to get at is the black and white ideology under most models of theistic religions that I have looked into, mostly the Abrahamic ones. I have not really looked into the Hindu ones or Buddhism too much, or any of the polytheistic religions. So when I speak about this, I only speak about the Abrahamic ones.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of black and white thinking that goes into theistic religions, unfortunately. I would agree with you there.
For sure.
But what's your point?
The point is, I just feel like it's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think it's more of a problem than I want to tackle, and that any one person should tackle. And I think you guys are doing great. It's just, I
mean, that's part of why we're doing what we're doing.
There's a better way about going about this.
Yes. So let me. I see where you're getting at here, Alex. At least I think I do. Let me make this super, super clear. Okay. When I say that it's their problem and they have to deal with it, what I mean is, for your own personal safety and mental health, it is not befall upon you to get the people in your personal life to be convinced, that they're wrong and that they're gaslighting you, right? I get that. What I mean is, I think that we do have a social responsibility overall to try to help people get out of black and white thinking and get out of these kinds of things. That's why I do a show like this. But there's also going to be limits to that. I have family members that do not agree with me, and then I don't talk to them about this stuff anymore. And that's just for my own sake, and that's for their sake. And that's unfortunate, but that's pretty much every person who's on YouTube doing this stuff has a story like that. And that's okay. We don't have to get every single person, but there's always going to be people who need help. There's always going to be people that can need help, for sure.
Also, don't forget that we do live in a situation where there are avenues to build other support systems.
Yes.
I know it's hard for some people harder for some than for others. But I think it's easier now than I think it's ever been to find a support system outside of the circle that may not be meeting the requirements necessary for own well-being.
Yes, I don't put it all on you to be the person to convince them, right? I don't think that's healthy. I think you have to take things a day at a time and realize that at the end of the day, people are probably not going to see the same things with you all the time. You may get some places with people, and you may change their mind on stuff, but don't think of it as like a failing if you can't, because that's just not a reasonable expectation to set on yourself.
Sorry about that. I was getting something to drink real quick. But yeah, I completely agree with you.
Well, good, Alex.
I agree with you guys.
Good. I sincerely hope that your situation with the people in your life who are gaslighting you gets better. I hope you're able to find peace with yourself, and I hope that you're able to at least convince them of something for your own sake. But I stand by this in that it is not everyone's personal responsibility to get your family members to absolutely believe and accept you for just who you are. And that's a sad thing to say. I think we should try, certainly, but it's not your fault if they don't. I think I felt a little bit of that too when I was first like really getting into this stuff, and I just felt alone in talking to people about this stuff. I didn't really get why people weren't seeing things the way I was, but I also had a unique life experience that led me to this point. It wasn't just an accepting of arguments. It was, a life that was lived, and other people have to live their lives too in order to sort of get to that place where they can be ready for that. And that's all I want to say about that. Ceasetoknow, you have anything to add?
No, I mean, the only thing I can really say is that ultimately it's your life. Like, you do the best you can to help other people see things more clearly, but it's not your responsibility ultimately. And I know it can be very hard to be in that kind of situation. All I would think is it's important to kind of branch out and find the kind of circles when possible that will help you be the happiest that you can be.
Absolutely. Man, we got a couple different calls that we can take tonight. I want to keep going. I want to talk to actually, you know what? We should do our promo. Let's do our promo right now. We're about at the midway point. Let's see what other shows are happening right now on the Atheist Experience Network.
Because, when you have some sex toys and they get kind of old, and when you start pulling them out, you're like, I don't think I can use this anymore.
Ooh, drinking babies.
Yeah, drinking babies, right? A nice, refreshing glass of babies. Now, I guess that would fall into the atheist mythos there.
Homosexuals getting married just destroys Christianity or something. Like, somehow they're coming to attack you. They didn't invite you to the wedding. Maybe these people are still like upset about that.
Christy, I'm gonna give you a safe word, okay?
Sure.
And if that's all right, and the safe word is pumpkin.
I got a pumpkin out. Out. Thank you, Kevin.
Can we talk about vaginas again?
There's going to be so much. Next week is just going to be clips of me and you saying vagina.
A vagina.
Mental vagina? Mental vagina. Vagina?
Yeah.
Vagina. Vagina? Vagina.
Vaginas. Vaginas.
Vagina, Chad. Vagina. Don't say vaginas.
Vagina.
Mine and Jenna's mental vagina.
Wait.
Vagina.
Vagina.
My mental vagina.
Crew. Vagina.
And just for you, for your birthday.
Yes.
Vagina.
We just have the best promos. God, I love our promos so much. It's so good. I'm so glad we started doing this. All of the out of context clips are great. And I have yet to drink a baby, by the way. Still hasn't happened yet. But we'll see. I got a lot of life to live. So we got some other callers that we want to talk to. Gosh. A lot of people. Some people that have been waiting a while. I want to talk to Deborah, who's calling in from North Carolina. So I think hers is most relevant right now. Deborah, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Going good.
I wanted to... Good. I wanted to bring up the suffering that... I've had some conversations online about, what about the suffering in this world and with especially with Christians and they bring up this question, and I find it a little bit ironic because there's so much suffering in the Bible. When you have slavery and misogyny and genocide, genital mutilation, famines, selective supremacy, land theft, I kind of find it hard to take their worldview seriously with respect to ethics and morality, because they kind of dismiss all that and say, well, their reward is in heaven.
Oh yeah. Right.
It's really repulsive.
It's a framing game. It's always been a framing game, and Christianity is not exclusive to that. Lots of religions are really great at it, but yes, it either boils down to ignorance, as in somebody doesn't know that these atrocities existed, or they know that these things happen, but they're framed in such a way that they become palatable or acceptable to someone's consciousness. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say their approach is also
it's projection.
Yeah, projection on some levels too. Absolutely.
And no religion has answered the question of evil properly, as far as I'm concerned. Like, to just say it's okay that we've suffered these horrible things now because we'll get rewarded later doesn't make anything better for me. And sometimes I've heard the answer, well, God is the one in power; he can do whatever he wants. But that's just supporting tyranny in that context.
Right.
I don't think that is a moral framework, which is why, like you said, it's ironic that they try to claim ownership of objective morality, when in reality their God is responsible for genocide, the worst kind of genocide.
Yep. The truth is, and this is true for any major religion that has ever had political relevancy, is that religions can be used to defend power structures that are already in place. Why is it that we live in a society that has historically valued a patriarchy for thousands of years? Part of that is due to a Christian mythos that defends this idea that a man is supposed to be head of a household and that whatever he says, it kind of goes. In order to not upset that, how do you justify that? What do you say? Well, you cite this text that agrees with this position, agrees with the power systems that are already at place. Same thing with slavery, okay? Hundreds, if not thousands of books and texts have been written by Christians over the years in defense of slavery. And not talking about just the slavery that you find in the Bible, but more modern forms of slavery, specifically the import of peoples from Africa and other nations into the United States. I mean, how many churches and church members were full of people who were slave owners and didn't bat an eye at that fact? The truth is, people just like
scripture to support it.
They do. It didn't bother a lot of people's consciousness because they had some sort of scriptural justification, religious justification to support the powers that be, and it's awful. It's truly awful.
Right. So to just kind of put a pin on the whole point, it is absolutely oppression to conformity, whether it's trying to push their religion onto other people via proselytizing, or whether it's trying to excuse away these atrocities.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I think in years' times we will see a lot of Christians who, just like now, who pretend like the owning of people, or racism in America wasn't justified by Christianity. Those who pretend that their systems weren't in place. We'll see the same thing about homosexual people who live in the United States and worldwide. I think 50 years from now, there's going to be a lot of Christians who say, "Oh, well, the Bible was never about justifying against homosexuality."
Well, you get it now.
People were just, you hear that now. It's just a wrong interpretation of the Bible. Okay, sure. Even if that's true, let's say that that's true and that originally, it meant something else. It doesn't matter, because for 2,000 years, it meant something else for a lot of people. Maybe not exactly 2,000, but you get the idea. It's been a part of a justification of power for centuries, and it has caused misery as a result. And you have to rectify that if you're a Christian. You have to. I don't know. You have to deal with that.
Right. And Texas is a perfect case in point.
Right.
Texas,
for sure.
Texas is a perfect case in point. My goodness. Listen, we've been talking about this particular issue a lot these past few weeks, but I am seriously worried about living in this state for the next couple of years. I thought weed was going to be legalized by now. Damn it. And now we're getting all this shit with, abortion being illegal.
I mean,
it's just ridiculous.
It's unbelievable. And the same people that pretend to care about maintaining the Constitution are then immediately willing to, throw it in the trash because of their religious convictions.
It's true. It's true.
It's
yeah. So anyway, it's a good to get that off our chest sometimes, huh, Deborah?
Yes, that's all I wanted to say. You move along to the next caller. Have a great night.
I appreciate it, Deborah. You too. No, it's always good to just kind of bring it out in the open again. We talked about why do we do this stuff? Why do we talk about it? It's a question that I get asked a lot, and it's because of stuff like this. Everything that we just talked about.
Yeah, when they ask like, why do we care if we don't believe in God? It's like, well, because those beliefs have consequences.
Absolutely,
horrible. So.
Absolutely, and beliefs matter when it comes to human interactions. Your beliefs affect other people's lives. Period. They absolutely do, and you have to deal with that. I think it's responsible to deal with that. So let's get to some more callers. Here we got Barrie calling in from New Zealand. Barrie, you've been waiting a long time to talk to us. You are on the line with Truth Wanted. What's up?
Yeah, hi guys. It's good to talk to you. It's actually Saturday afternoon over here.
Hell yeah! I'm enjoying a beautiful thing. I'd love to enjoy a beautiful New Zealand Saturday one day. That's definitely a life goal of mine. So good for you.
It's fantastic. We're going into spring. I just wanted to share with you a personal experience I had and sort of get your ideas about it. I mean, obviously I've got my own. So it was a couple of years ago. I work as a teacher, and I was quite happy in my little job. We had a new guy join the staff. His name was Alex, and I felt a bit awkward at first because he obviously had some physical disabilities, and I like to think of myself as pretty relaxed, but it took me a little time to adjust to it. Once we broke through that, we hit it off really well. We got on really well, and we found out that we had a lot of friends in common that we didn't know, and so even after a few months after that, I realized Alex was going to be one of these friends, like you get maybe twice in your life that, a really good friend you can talk to about anything, Anyway, over some time, Alex started having stomach complaints, and he kept going to the doctor, and they misdiagnosed it. Eventually went to a specialist after about 6 months, and they said that he had level 4 bowel cancer, terminal.
Oh, gosh.
And that just, he was 42. Young guy, and just fantastic guy. I mean, despite his disabilities, he never thought about himself, always out there for other people. Nice guy, lovely guy. So he quit work. We stayed in touch, of course, and I was there for him sort of throughout his whole process, It took maybe about a year before it finally got him. And I went to the funeral, you could imagine it was quite difficult trying to speak, Anyway, about a year later, his wife took the decision to cremate Alex. So they had a special ceremony, and it was really nice, good weather. We blew some bubbles and had some songs. It was great. It was great.
Oh, good.
So that day, it was hard, but, we got through it. Later on that day, after we'd had all the ceremony and stuff, I was hungry, and I thought, I'll get a pizza. It's lazy, but yeah, I like pizza, So I went to the shop, made my order, and I was only going to get the pizza originally, and then right at the last minute, something said to me, "Oh, grab a drink," And I was so hungry, I didn't even look at the bottle that they gave me. It was a Coke. Now, I don't know if this is a worldwide thing, but certainly here in New Zealand, Coke's doing this thing at the moment where they personalize the labels that they put on the bottles. It's a bit of a gimmick, for promotion, I suppose. So you could have your
they
bottle.
Put people's names, or they put him and her, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And but I wasn't interested in that. I just grabbed me a bottle. came home, flipped open the pizza, munching away, watching a movie, and I grabbed the bottle, turned it round, and the bottle said, "Enjoy a Coke with Alex and friends." And it just sent a shiver up my spine when that happened. It was on the day of the interment of his ashes, you know. And I'd never really had an experience like that before. I've been an atheist my whole life, and I'm a really skeptical person. But when that happened, I got to be honest, you know.
Oh no! Oh no! We are working on trying to reconnect the call here. It'll be back on in just a second. But yes, everybody has these kinds of things every once in a while, I think, right? Like, and that is, I think it's okay to kind of have some wonder, you know, for how crazy the universe can give these kinds of coincidences. But, you know, and I'm sure Barrie would probably agree at the end of the day, this probably doesn't mean more than what it is, you know, just a coincidence. At least that's the only way I could interpret that. But I think we're back. Barrie, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry, something happened there. We blanked out, yeah.
Yeah, we were just saying it sounds like a mighty fine coincidence, you know, and I'm sure that you wonder about that and wonder if it means anything, and I think that's perfectly natural to wonder something like that, especially with something so specific. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how you specifically feel about it, but of course, as a fellow atheist, you know, as someone who doesn't necessarily believe that there is some divine plan for everything, I can't attribute it to more than just that, just a coincidence.
I'll just add that what's fascinating about that is the way in which our minds look for patterns, right? Like, you know, low probability events do happen and coincidences do happen. And of course, we kind of have these built-in meanings and context. But, you know, I think that's more about like how we see connections than necessarily there being something, you know, more
sure
than that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Barrie?
Yeah, I mean, my take on it is very similar to your own in the end. But I had to fight with it a little bit, you know, because I'm only human. But yeah. I mean, I take the same thing. It's sort of confirmation bias, some of this other stuff. I think one little thing it helped me with, though, being an atheist my whole life, on a sort of a micro level, it helped me understand the fine-tuning argument. It's, you know, or the sort of solipsism of it, the fact that somehow the whole thing is just being provided for my benefit. You know, this bottle has appeared just for me at this exact time that I need it to be there, you know. And I always struggled, for example, with the fine-tuning argument that theists come up with, this sort of idea that the whole universe is just created for my benefit. It helped me understand that. You know, it's like, oh, I get where they're coming from now. Like, I think they're wrong, but I kind of get it a bit now. It must be really a powerful feeling to them, you know.
Right.
On a small scale, it helped me with that a bit. Yeah.
When I was in college, I used to work at a Christian summer camp. Okay, and so when I was out there, I thought I had these really incredible experiences that I attributed to, you know, the Holy Spirit showing me things about the world. Like, isn't it great that I'm having these things? And to me, this was like an internal confirmation that, you know, Christianity was real. The Holy Spirit is a thing. Jesus died on the cross, you know, the whole 9 yards. That was an internal confirmation for me. Later on, when I was kind of deconstructing, I met with some Hare Krishna Hindus on my college campus. And I decided to have a meditation experience with them because I had never done anything like that. And they were asking if people were interested on campus, you know. And I felt something really interesting in that meditation experience. We were kind of all in this circle and we were chanting and stuff. And I realized, I was like, wow, I think the only reason why I thought that this other stuff meant stuff was because I was at a Christian camp. So, of course, my brain was totally framed on this idea that, oh, it has to come from this book that we've been spending all summer reading, you know, and just generally living in a Christian society, you kind of have to think, oh, yeah, maybe there is an afterlife and there's spirits communicating back from the dead and things like that. And when your brain is so framed to that, you become more attuned to these kinds of connections.
But just to add to that, I mean, the fact that, you know, all these different cultures and all these different people who believe different ideologies are all having these meditative experiences or these sort of finding of these patterns, even including atheists, like we just heard, points to there being a deeper principle. Right. People want to assume that it's giving credence to their particular ideology, when in reality they're just saying that because that's what they're used to, that's what they're surrounded by.
Yeah.
Once you've kind of take the time to travel, take the time to talk to people who have a different background than you, and you find these commonalities even in their ideologies in their lives, then you kind of take a step back and you start to see on a larger scale that this is just something that's true about the human condition, an experience that we have through the human condition.
Right, and this is something too. Like when colonists were first coming to the lands of other peoples, right? And these peoples talked about their own spirituality. Suddenly, you see writings of people trying to reframe their experiences. I feel like the word of the day is reframe or framing, right? As like, well, this is that of the spirit, or that's the influence of demons, right? But you think that if God was real and that he has an interest in humans, you think that he would make some sort of appearance and specifically make himself known to the Aborigine people. For example, why was it so that it only happened? Jesus came in the Middle East, and the people in the Middle East, kind of had these experiences, whereas people continents away had no knowledge of Christianity or its doctrines or history until other believers came to it. It's almost like it's a cultural phenomenon, I'm glad that you at least have. It sounds like very positive memories of your friend Barrie, and it sounds like a fun story to tell people. But I think if we sound like we're on the same page at the end of the day, it's just, kind of a coincidence. It is what it is, but maybe other people would feel differently about it, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was an interesting thing that happened. I haven't really had that happen before, but it was just one of those things. Yeah, but no, I agree with you. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I could definitely. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I guess that's all I got to say on it, really, Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story.
I think it's all just about putting your ego aside, isn't it? Yeah, you're welcome.
I think it is. I think it is kind of incredible that some people think that the God of the entire universe does want to talk to them and help them find their car keys. Those kinds of stories I think are always kind of funny to me. Even when I was a Christian, I didn't buy a lot of those kinds of tales, or even just people from the other life or from the afterlife trying to communicate, like, oh, they wanted to point out that they didn't like this picture on the wall, so they took it down from the house by having it fall over. The kinds of little things like that always kind of seem silly. But anyway, Barrie, again, thanks for sharing your story. I appreciate you calling in, and good luck to your life. I hope you're having a good life. I hope everybody's watching is having a good life, I guess, right? So fun stuff, fun times all around. We still have some more calls here. I want to talk to James, who's calling in from New York. James, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hello, Objectively Dan and Ceasetoknow. How are you guys doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Doing good. Seeking truth as always.
Hell yeah. That's what we want. Not in like the weird, like conspiratorial sense, I hope, right? Like not like that kind. I think that's like just side tangent here. Picking a name for this show, like the Truth Wanted name, that was kind of like a ploy because I really wanted people to kind of think it was one of those kinds of shows and then have it not be. But it ends up having this backfire effect where people just make the assumption when they first hear that I host a show called that I'm like this kind of out there guy. So I don't know what that makes people think about me, but it's fun. Anyways, that's a tangent. James, what's up?
So I have a UAP story.
Okay.
I actually called your show a couple of months ago, and I don't know if my truth is exactly wanted on your show. No.
Okay. Well, I'm happy.
UAP story.
Unidentified aerial phenomenon. Go ahead. Yeah, tell us about it. What's up?
So, do you guys? I don't know. Objectively, Dan and Ceasetoknow. Do you guys remember when Hellbop came around? I think it was 94, 95, maybe around there or so.
I don't think I was born yet, but yes, I know that it happened.
Objectively, Dan, you just made me feel my age. Something awful.
I'm sorry. I'm just telling you. I know it as a historical fact, but not as a personal experience.
Well, what's the name? What is the name?
Oh, okay.
Comment. Yeah, I know it happened in the 90s. I don't know when. Hail Bop. Yeah.
So me and my family were living very much out in the boonies or the sticks and the countryside of upstate New York at the time.
Okay.
And we were living so far, the closest airport was probably maybe 2.5, 3, 4 hours away. And we were living so far off the grid and in the countryside that we didn't even have electricity.
Okay.
And of course, I'm setting up the story because this is all set up for the story. So I'm seeing the U app just to kind of anyway. So we only had a generator, and seeing planes at night was a very rare and unusual thing. So anyway, so I was chopping wood. It was just about fall, autumn, so the winter. And I was chopping wood, and I came in. We only had wood stoves, and the generator was off. So I came in, fueling the wood stove, and my mother and my sister were in the back room, in the back bedroom. We lived in a Kwanzaa-style hut modern cabin in the back of in that time. And anyway, so they called to me and said, James, get in here. You got to see this. So I dropped the wood, came into the back, and this was when I had my first seizure attack. And they were gawking out the window. I almost collapsed. I had a seizure, and I almost collapsed on a red hot wood stove. I was able to somehow manage to sway my body onto my mom's bed to keep from getting burned on the wood stove.
Okay.
So finally, I have like this little mini seizure, and I lost time. And when I came to, my mom and my sister were still at the window in place in the same spot where they had been at before I had the seizure. And they said, James, you have to get over here. There are 3 lights in the woods, and we don't know what it is. And it's been there for about the past 15 to 20 minutes. So I got up, went to the window. They didn't even know I had a seizure. They didn't notice that I'd collapsed on the bed, which I thought was odd. And and then I'm just looking out the window, and there's this triangular. There are 3 white lights in a triangular shape configuration that's just moving and hovering slightly across the tree line, ever so slightly. And I wanted to go out. My mom wouldn't let me. I was going to go deep into the woods to see if I could get a better look, to see where it was at. Anyway, so it was just moved across the tree line, and it slowly hovered out of sight, and we didn't hear a thing. And then every night it would be for 2 weeks, it would be at the same spot, and it would just hover, and it would just be at the same spot, and it would go away, and it would just slowly leave. And then, hello?
I'm listening. I'm wondering what's next.
Yeah. So, and then one night I'm viewing Hail Bop, and the night that I got the best look at it was when it came right over the ship. The craft actually came right over my head. It was a triangular craft. I saw 3 white lights at each point of the tip of the triangle. And then the underside of the craft, I'd say the craft was probably about the size of a small jetliner. The underside of the craft, it had a trans-colored metal that seemed to almost glow with illumination, a circular light within the center of the craft that was illuminated. And that was the last time I saw it. It just flew off into the night sky.
That's pretty weird.
Seizures haven't stopped since. Yeah. My whole family saw it.
You think your seizures were somehow related to this phenomenon?
I think I might have been abducted, man.
Okay. Well, that's
I think I have a malfunctioning alien implant somewhere in my brain.
a malfunctioning alien. Well, have you ever thought about getting that like looked at? Like if it's actually in there? You don't think people could like find out if it's really there?
No, they wouldn't show up on our equipment. Can't pick them up.
No.
The problem with that is that none of what you're saying is falsifiable. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. Maybe it happened exactly the way you're describing. Maybe it was an alien. But obviously, we were in there. There's no way to really approach the situation in a way where we can analyze it thoroughly and get a robust analysis. I mean, there are examples of situations where, again, this may be you said this was in the woods, so I'm not sure how that would work out, but there are places I've heard, even in natural settings, where you may be experiencing certain fumes, and those fumes cause hallucinations. I'm not saying that is necessarily what happened, but I'm saying there are a variety of possibilities, some natural, maybe some not. And who's to say? Like we don't have any kind of methodology that we can apply to really be sure what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's from my perspective, I think it's silly to think that there wouldn't be aliens somewhere in the universe, given how obviously expensive it is. I also think that it seems unlikely that they wouldn't come here, but obviously, it's all just guesswork, right? Like,
sure.
Ceasetoknow, I would reach out to you from a Shakespearean perspective and say there are greater things in heaven and earth ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophy, my good sir. I mean,
look, I have my own story of having seen something when I was younger, but go ahead.
You saw something when you were younger?
Yeah, when I think I was probably around 8 or 9 years old, and I have this memory of seeing something that we would call a UFO coming from behind a building and zapping around and disappearing. But how much of that is my own imagination? How much of that is a constructed memory from other things? How much of that, it's hard. Like I said, without, I'm not saying that there aren't mysteries or that these aren't possibilities. Whether or not I would confidently say one way or another is where I think you and I might differ. Like you seem to be very certain that that's what that was, and I'm saying, yeah, it could be. Maybe that could be what it is.
Certain. I'm not necessarily certain it was an alien craft. I mean, I'm not certain that it was an alien craft or that my seizure disorder is necessarily connected to it. However, I did want to make this caveat clear that there is a government installation that all the townspeople, that a lot of the locals know about. I even knew a security guard that worked there for quite some time. So, it could have been some government craft that they were testing. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, that is also a possibility for sure.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately,
what do you think, objectively, Dan?
Well, here's the thing. I get calls. It's been happening more recently the past couple of months. I get calls just like yours, James, where I get told a story from, some years ago about an encounter that somebody's had. And I just wonder what people want me to do with it. And not saying, again, in the same case as Ceasetoknow, it's just without a methodology, I can only just kind of talk to you about it and just say, that's kind of weird, and I can just throw out possible explanations, but ultimately at the end of the day, I can't tell you exactly what happened to you without being there, So I don't doubt that weird happened to people and people have experiences that are hard to explain sometimes, but I've yet to be convinced specifically that people in general are abducted by aliens. I'm still a bit skeptical on that front.
Right. So. At the very least, with the idea that the government has said it's going to start releasing what they know about UFOs every 6 months, and with their recent findings to Congress and the House, the Senate, and it was only 10 pages, and the fact that they could have put the findings from Project Blue Book and the findings from M Majestic 12 and and that sort of thing into that, and all of the stuff that they've released and the 200 pages that they released, or the 300 pages they released prior, that might have made the Senate take a greater and deeper look into the issue and put more funding behind the issue, but very much, I think the idea that they only gave them 10 pages was, don't look at this too much. That was because in the end, do you really want your children knowing that there are little gray men with giant dark black eyes hiding in the shadows at night? It should be kept secret.
It could be that. It could be that. It could be that. It could be other things too. Like, look, like COINTELPRO, okay? Like FBI surveillance that was happening domestically, illegally. Like that was, a lot of that kind of stuff was hidden because it was illegal. This kind of investigation into what we are figuring out about the UAP phenomenon, maybe something related to that. It may be because the government is committing illegal acts and they don't want people to look into that. It may have nothing to do with aliens.
That's a good point.
There's a couple of different things.
Dan, I gotta say.
Yeah. I do want to add, from my perspective, I would always want to know what actually is the case, rather than now. Yes, of course, I'm sure the government does things. There are things that it does in secret. I'm also generally skeptical of conspiracy theories, just because I personally don't give people enough credit in that sense. I don't think that people are able to keep secrets very well. And so I think most conspiracies assume too much of people for me to take them too seriously. That's not to say that there aren't secrets, but I think it's far fewer than people think there are.
I take that line of logic to some extent, but at the same time, there's a lot of things, in speaking in regards to the U.S. government, that we never specifically knew about because Senate inquiries hadn't happened yet and documents weren't released.
Sure.
And that's not true for just the U.S. That's true for other nations as well.
Of course.
I think people.
But it's becoming harder now. It's becoming harder.
Yeah, it's definitely harder now. Definitely harder now. I would agree with you there. But I'm not gonna be the first person to say I don't think that shady stuff doesn't happen. I just don't always think it's aliens. It could be other stuff.
Right.
But anyway.
Right.
Anyway, that's all the thoughts I got on that, James. Unless you had anything else to add.
No, Objectively Dan, I'm still just to get. I'm not anything on that. I'm still in a state of cognitive dissonance when it comes to my faith. That is still kind of an issue, but
in the sense that your God belief,
yes, still in a state of cognitive dissonance. I'm still hearing voices, but that's all positive. One thing I would like to say, to get back to the idea of what you guys were talking about earlier, since you asked callers to comment on it, was that I think, am I correct to say that your good and esteemed colleague, Mr. Matt Dillahunty, does not believe in objective morality, or objective ethics at all? That there's anything.
It's been a while since I talked to Matt about.
And what about you, Dan? Let me ask you specifically. Let's not bring Matt into this. But do you believe there's anything in this world, and you can answer this too, Ceasetoknow, that is objectively and ethically, morally wrong because it is intrinsically that way?
Okay, yes. This is what I can answer more to. I can't speak to Matt. I haven't talked to him about this kind of stuff. In a while, if I do talk to him, it's usually about other stuff, what good TV shows are on and stuff, right? But as far as intrinsically good things versus intrinsically evil things, I think we fall into this fallacy again of this perspective is always going to come from humans and their interests, or at least, beings who are capable of sussing out interests in themselves and others. Obviously, I do think animals besides humans can come to conclusions about things that they want to do. But like this idea of intrinsic, like, because the problem with this kind of question is like, oh, do you not think that at its core, like, murder is wrong? You know, like, I think that's what, I'm not saying this is what you are trying to do, James, but this is how a lot of people try to kind of frame this a bit.
I'm not trying to back you in a corner.
Oh, I get you. I just point out when it comes to issues like murder, like the definition of murder is an unlawful killing. You can think of all kinds of reasons throughout human history where killing has been justified in one way or another. And it always seems to be this kind of, you know, this thing that's continuing to evolve and grow as we develop our own sense of values in new cultures as human beings. I think it's a continuous thing. And I'm not fully set on this idea that ethics can be fully knowable. Can it be fully objective? Maybe, but maybe we can't fully know what that is, even if it is. But cease to know. So, you go ahead and add too.
I'll deal with the question this way. I think one question is one of ontology, and one question is one of epistemology.
Yeah, like, good point.
I happen to think that yes, there are objective moral truths. I think those include murder is wrong, rape is wrong. There may be certain situations like stealing, for example, where you may be able to some degree justify stealing to feed your family. It's still wrong, but it's less wrong in a certain context. I still, think that there's an objective space there where we can talk about these issues, and I think the foundation there is once you acknowledge that consciousness exists and consciousness has a certain nature, and then when we talk about morality, we're talking about a spectrum of well-being and suffering and the behaviors that will lead to those extremes. Then we have, at least in principle, a space for right and wrong answers. Whether or not we can discover them, whether or not we will discover them, those are all open questions. I think some of those questions we've answered already. Some are more open-ended. Like, I don't think there's any context in which something like rape could be justified. And
right.
So the extremes are useful to shed light on why there is that objective space. Then when you're talking about, well, how do we organize our society, economic system to better flourish? Well, who knows? Like, that's something that is very unclear and probably will be for a long time. But at least the space for objective answers are there.
There you go. Anyway, I think that's all the time that we got for this call. So, James, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thank you.
I do appreciate it. And you even got that bonus question there at the end, because we're about close to the end of the show before tonight. I want to give a special thanks to Ceasetoknow for joining me tonight. Thanks again for joining us. And yeah, where can people find you at if they want to see more of your stuff?
Sure. Axioms on Trial on YouTube. There you go. The link is right there. That's basically really the main ways to reach out. Also, Gmail. We have a Gmail account, axiomsontrial@gmail.com, if you want to come on as a guest. Patreon.com/axiomsontrial. These are all basically the social media that we have up. And like I said earlier, we talk about philosophy, science, religion, compare and contrast ideologies. And the different weaknesses and strengths of different perspectives. So
yes. So, and again, J Mike has also made appearances on that channel as well. So definitely.
Well, we co-host the show together.
Right, you co-host the show together. Yeah. So definitely check that out again if you're a fan of J Mike. If obviously another host here at the Atheist Community of Austin. Again, I am Objectively Dan, and this is Truth Wanted. This show is recorded live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. So if you're listening to a recording of it, come check us out live. Come call in. I'd love to talk to you. There's a couple different ways you can support this show. One of it is through through becoming a member. You can click that join button to become a member and donate through there. You get cool little emojis for that. We appreciate everybody that supports us through there. There's a couple other ways you can do it as well. One of the ways I mentioned was patreon.com. Again, folks, we are out of unique people to shout out for Patreon. Everybody that is on the patron list right now has gotten a shout out. Again, I'd be happy to shout them out again, but I'd love to shout out some more new names. I want to know that people still like this show and at least like it enough to support it. So thank you to everybody that donates on patreon.com. You guys rock. Another way to support the show is through getting some merch. We got a store that has shirts, mugs, hoodies, the works, all kinds of cool stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. You can email me. It's truth@atheist-community.org. And you can follow me on Twitter as well. It's @ObjectivelyDan. One thing as well is that this show is on the AEN Podcast Network, which is a collective of different shows, all produced by the Atheist Committee of Austin. So check those other shows out: Atheist Experience, Secular Sexuality, Talk Heathen, The Works. I am going to be on Talk Heathen this Sunday as well. So if you like me, you should definitely check out this Sunday's episode. And we are also going to be in the after show too in just a second here. So join us on the Discord, to the fan run Discord for the show, to try to answer some questions on there. Last but never not least, I have to thank the wonderful, stupendous, amazing, spectacular crew that helps make this show happen every single week. Look at that crew. Martin's scared of something. I don't know what was happening there. He had fear on his face. It was weird. I'd never seen it like that before. He must have saw a rat or a bug or something. But anyway, Martin, you stay safe. And the rest of the crew, you guys are fantastic. Thank you guys so much for doing what you do. This show would not be a thing without the awesome crew behind the scenes. So thanks you guys
again so much for having me.
Oh, of course, Ceasetoknow. Thanks so much for being on. Do you have any words of wisdom you want to give out before we wrap up tonight's show?
Be kind.
I like it. Short and sweet and to the point. Thanks again for joining us. And thank you, everybody, to listening to this week's show. Remember to always keep wanting the truth. And I'll see you next time.
Watch the nonprofits and join the hosts in the live chat. Sundays at 3 p.m. Central between the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.